Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. Welcome, everybody. It is Thursday, March 26th, and there's a lot on your minds, and there's a lot going on in the world, and I hope to cover at least some of it here. As you know, I kind of make a game of seeing if I can tell a story with all your questions embedded in it. And I can't get to all the questions now, which is, I think, a reflection of how much is going on and how confusing it all is. Because what feels like to me is I'm actually going to tell you a story first about somebody said they wanted to hear something interesting about my life. And this reminded me when I was reading all of your comments about how many questions people had and how they were somewhat not fully formed. And there was a lot going on. And what did this have to do with that? And so on. It reminded me of when I was a waitress in Oklahoma and I worked on the floor with this incredibly good waiter. And he used to be able to handle anything, just like anything. And I asked him once how he did it. And he said, "You cannot let the floor rule you. What you do," and we had a place that you could stand where the people on the floor couldn't see you. He said, "You stand right here and you say, I am not going to let the floor control me. I'm going to control the floor." And then you go out and you do everything in a circle. Counterclockwise in that case on that floor, and you take the Coke over there, and you take the sandwich over there, and you do it all at once on your terms. And I sort of feel like we're at that moment in the United States where we simply can't let the floor run us anymore, because the person behind the floor, the person who's calling the media and so on right now, is completely wackadoodle. So there is no floor under us. That is, the president of the United States will say one thing and then turn around a half hour later and say the complete opposite. One of the stories I'm going to tell you today about what's going on in the country is about Transportation Security Administration funding, but even I don't know what Trump is asking for around that now. So it's going to be time, sort of, I think, to take a step back and stand there where the floor can't see you and say, what do we want out of what's going forward? And so, to that end, I want to start a day in a place that you did not, I think, expect me to, and that is with the nature of the country and the globe that the presidency of Donald Trump's is overturning in this moment. So the what became known as the rules-based international order after World War II was based on three pillars. It was based on the idea of free trade, including freedom of the seas, so that countries could trade with each other and they didn't have to worry about paying passage through certain straits, for example, and they didn't have to worry about getting shot. There's ships being shot at, and it enabled a trading system that both brought prices down in a lot of places, but also created extraordinary prosperity in that period all around the globe, including lifting more than 1 billion people, especially in Asia and Africa, out of poverty. So there was this idea of free trade, including freedom of the seas, crucial freedom of the seas. You can tell I'm coming back to that, right? And then it also included the idea of defensive alliances, the idea that you would make friends during peacetime, not during wartime. So you'd already have these in place so that you didn't invade other countries. But if somebody invaded you, you could say, hey, to your buddies, let's fight back together against that person who's invaded, because what that would do is it would stop the invasions. People would sit there and say, well, if I'm going into that country and I'm going to be met by 34 other countries, I better not invade. And the third pillar of that post-war international order was the idea of countries spreading the idea of liberal democracies. That is, that people had the right to choose their governments. And that having the right to choose your government also, part of this was the idea that countries had sovereignty, that that other countries wouldn't try to invade each other. Now, what Trump has done to that international order is to accelerate its decline. And he is not solely responsible for this. There were a number of reasons that that system needed a lot of tweaking, not least of which that many of the developing countries had not really been given a seat at the table, but also that really taking off in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a sense among liberal democracies, primarily the United States and places like the United Kingdom, that so long as you spread the idea of capitalism, you were also spreading the idea of liberal democracy. And so there was a focus on the idea of spreading capitalism into places like the former Soviet republics. And what we discovered by doing that was that, in fact, it was wrong to assume that democracy and capitalism went hand in hand. In fact, it's very possible to have capitalism, at least a form of capitalism, and the concentration of wealth that ends up getting rid of democracy altogether. And that's what you saw in the former Soviet republics, for example, when you had the idea of new republics turning into oligarchies really quickly. And that's what you've seen in other developing countries over the last 30 years. And that's certainly what you've seen in the United States of America, where the idea of pushing deregulation and low taxes and so on because it would develop the economy has in fact resulted in wealth and power accumulating in a really small group of people. So those pillars were already wobbly. But this is one of the things that the Biden and Harris administration tried to do, was to try and strengthen those pillars again, to try and strengthen the defensive alliances and strengthen the free trade, and above all, to strengthen the idea of representative democracy, especially in the United States. And this was written all over that administration. Well, Trump in his second term has just shredded these ideas. And he got rid of the idea of free trade with tariffs. With his idea, he was going to reimpose the tariffs, not only just from before World War II, but also all the way back into the 1890s. That's why he talked so much about William McKinley, a president in that era, who was really known sort of as the big guy who yelled about tariffs all the time. And this is killing me, by the way, because I know a lot about William McKinley, and that's a rabbit hole we're not going into right now, much though I would like to. All right, so Trump went after that. But now on the table, there is also, of course, freedom of the seas, because one of the things that is developing in the Strait of Hormuz, over which Iran exercises power, is that Iran is now letting ships pass through the strait, but at a cost. They are saying you can't use this strait unless you fork over, I think the current going rate is $2 million. So we are starting to see what it looks like when you lose these pillars, when you lose, in this case, freedom of the seas. But we're also seeing other things as well. And I'm going to go now to that second pillar, to the idea of defensive alliances. Because under those alliances and under the idea of security, protecting people's security, you had the idea that, under the United Nations and the sort of the rubrics that were established by the United Nations and organizations like that, that countries would not invade each other. That you were going to protect the sovereignty of countries. And this really becomes challenged. I mean, of course, it becomes challenged with the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, which is one of the reasons that George H.W. Bush pushed back against Iraq to push it out of Kuwait and then stopped there. That's what was going on with that. But in the case of Russia invading Ukraine, first in 2014, when the United States, among other allies and partners, stepped up to support Ukraine to try and force Russia back out. But then overwhelmingly in 2022, you got Russia saying, we don't believe in protecting sovereignty. We want Donbas. We want this eastern region of Ukraine, and by God, we're going to take it. And so the United States, again, at this point under Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as well as allies and partners around the world, organized to try and help Ukraine push back against that invasion. Now, I'm not going to, again, go down that rabbit hole because there's a lot of permutations of what those decisions looked like and where they might have been strong and where they might have been weak. But the idea was that the United States was firmly on the side of that international rules based order, and that it believed in the idea of sovereignty, and that it believed in the idea of free trade, defensive alliances, and the idea of democratic societies. That that idea there is that Russia wanted to challenge it. Russia wanted to challenge it because it wanted to take more land, but also because it wanted to destroy that rules-based international order, because Russia under Vladimir Putin believes that it can expand its power to become sort of an imperial power again. And clearly Donald Trump is working to join that kind of an idea of the world, to get rid of the idea of the rules-based international order and replace it with an idea in which a few countries exercise power over others, and crucially, that international oligarchs are aligned with each other. So we're really seeing this. Of course, we've seen it all along with Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin and his support for Viktor Orban in Hungary and so on. But all this is really coming to the fore under the Donald Trump's February 28th attacks on Iran. Now, with those attacks, Trump didn't talk to any of America's traditional allies and partners in these alliances that I'm talking about. Didn't go to NATO. Didn't talk to anybody, for the simple reason that Iran, according to American intelligence assessments, and so what the intelligence community does is it assesses dangers to the United States. That's what they're supposed to do. And when they make a decision, they call it an assessment. And they never give you 100% assessment, but they can say, hey, we assess, sort of says, here's your answer. The United States intelligence community assessed that the Iran did not pose an imminent threat to the United States and would not pose an imminent threat to the United States for at least a decade. All right. So there was no excuse for the United States to hit Iran as it did. Instead of going to the US intelligence community, what Trump did is he apparently was having discussions with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS is how people refer to him in the media. And those two leaders, one of Israel and one of Saudi Arabia, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, he's just the crown prince, but they wanted to see Iran weakened for a number of reasons. And they convinced Trump, apparently, and mind you, I want to be very clear here, this was still his decision. These people who are trying to give him a pass by saying, well, he got talked into it, that I used the word bullshit the other day, and I feel strongly about that. The president of the United States is responsible for whatever decisions they make. But what apparently he saw there was an opportunity to do a quick strike against Iran, and that he believed would get rid of the old Ayatollah, the supreme leader, and enable the other people on the ground to replace that supreme leader with somebody who would be more amenable to working with Trump, especially over issues regarding oil, because one of the things you can see Trump trying to do is trying to monopolize a lot of new oil sources. So he thought this is what is going to happen. There was going to be this dramatic strike, the same kind of strike that we had in Venezuela, and he would look great. And this would probably help his badly sagging numbers, approval numbers. But that's not what we got. And what we got instead was this ongoing war that has upended the trade around the world and has upended this idea of the old rules-based international order in which people don't invade each other. We're getting the closure of the Strait of Hormuz that covers that through which about 20% of the world's oil, slightly more of that of its liquid natural gas, and about 20% of fertilizer or fertilizer components travels through. And you're seeing the result of that in dramatically rising prices of oil, measured in Brent crude is what people are looking at, because that's one of the measures of Middle Eastern oil. But also, you're starting to see, we're not there yet, because when they talk about the price of oil, they're actually talking about oil futures. They're not talking about buying it today. They're talking about where it's going, where that price is going, and that the old oil is still sort of working through the system. So the prices are starting to go up at the gas tank, but we haven't seen the prices going up in everything else that are going to go up now, in food prices and so on, because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And a new report yesterday, I think, suggested that we're looking at dramatic inflation up to at least 4.2%, which is higher than we are now, and a lot higher than anybody wants it to be. So we're seeing that, but we're also seeing, I think, a pretty dramatic attempt to reorder the world along the lines that I just talked about. Because in Russia, where Vladimir Putin would like very much to see this reorganization of the world and would like very much to take over land from Ukraine, he's actually in real trouble in that war. Ukraine has brought the power of its drone warfare to the fore. And can I just point out here, and this is why historians sometimes see stuff. If you remember all the way back, was it last summer, there was a Ukrainian drone attack on an airfield in Russia, all taking place with fairly inexpensive drones that decimated the planes on that tarmac. And people like me said, oh boy, we're in a new moment of military history, because you can get rid of really expensive things in a really cheap way. And this is going to change everything. And a lot of people said, oh, we've had drones. This is not that big a deal, and so on. I think you can see what a big deal it was now by the fact that, for example, Iran can keep the Strait of Hormuz closed because it has drones. And all of a sudden, you're seeing the United States shooting down drones with incredibly expensive Patriot missiles that we haven't yet, that the world is not caught up yet to the importance of drones. And you can also see this in the fact that the calculus appears to have changed in Russia, where Russia made advances for a while, and now Ukraine is making those advances back into its territory and threatening Russia, especially Russian oil fields. So um, there seems to be, on the part of Russia and Trump, a real desire to move things along really quickly, especially in terms of cementing Russia's power over Ukraine. So today, a number of things happened. And that one of the most dramatic is that, according to Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, the United States has told him that it will only offer security guarantees to Ukraine if Ukraine gives up Donbas to Russia. Basically, gives it the territory that Vladimir Putin has been wanting since at least 2015, essentially giving Russia what it wants. And at the same time, also today, the four members of the Russian Duma, and no, just four members of the Duma, have arrived in the United States to talk to um, Congress people in Washington, and tomorrow to talk to officials in Washington. A real breaking of the sort of sanctions and distance that the United States put between itself and Russia after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. You also saw the United States lifting sanctions on Russian oil, which will put about $14 billion into the Russian coffers to continue its war against Ukraine. At the same time, today, again, there have been noises coming out of the Pentagon that they might divert military help from Ukraine to the Middle East. So, in all everything else that's going on, you are watching, sort of under the radar, a real weakening of the United States commitment to Ukraine, and a real empowerment of Russia to go ahead and take that land that it invaded in 2014 and then again in 2022, which is not only an extraordinary loss to Ukraine, of course, first and foremost. It definitively breaks the idea that countries can't invade each other and grab stuff. Well, who else might want that? Of course, now you have Trump, who invaded Venezuela and grabbed their oil, or tried to. Right now, he hasn't been able to sell it because a judge says it's not his to own. But he's also clearly trying to do the same thing in Iran. So you're seeing that. You're also seeing Trump increasingly cozy up to people who have that kind of an approach to the world. So, another thing you may not have noticed is that the United States, both a few days ago and again today, has dramatically um, backed down on sanctions against Belarus. Belarus is a close ally of Vladimir Putin, and Trump has also um, come out in favor of and endorsed for his reelection on April 12th Viktor Orban of Hungary, another Putin ally. And those allies, especially Belarus, have recently, after the sanctions were lowered in the US the first time, and again, there were more today, they actually have been in Pyongyang where they were cutting a new deal today with Kim Jong un, saying that they are going to work together against, or they're going to resist what they consider undue pressure from what they call the West. So you can see the US splitting away from our traditional allies and instead really supporting Vladimir Putin and really supporting the idea of this sort of international, extremely wealthy oligarchy that behaves however it wishes. And I think you can also see that in the administration's determination to have this war in whatever way it wants. It is currently not talking to Congress except behind closed doors about what it may or may not be doing in Iran. And in those briefings, they have been so incomplete that even loyal Republicans are going in front of the cameras and saying, we are not getting enough information. And now they want, they're spending $1 billion a day, and now they want another injection of $200 billion to fight this war. And Trump quite openly last night said, I'm not going to call it a war. I'm going to call it a military exercise, because if you call it a war, you're supposed to have permission, and I don't want to get permission. That's really extraordinary coming out of the president of the United States, basically saying I'm acting unconstitutionally. But there's been something else this week, I think, that really feeds that idea of Trump changing the whole nature of the post-World War order. But in a second, I'll explain changing the nature of the United States itself. And that is this idea of selling national secrets for profit. And what I mean by that really came to visibility on Monday when Trump, in the morning, announced that he was negotiating with Iran. Now, it turned out not to be true. But on the basis of that statement, the price of oil dropped dramatically and the stock market jumped dramatically. But about 15 minutes before he made that statement, somebody invested a whole lot of money in stock futures and in oil futures, and they bet the right way. So they made off with hundreds of millions of dollars, at least hundreds of millions of dollars. The oil futures alone were worth about $580 million. And that's not including, they also invested in S&P 500 futures. And I don't know what those numbers were like. I haven't seen those numbers. I assume somebody does know what they are. And we are seeing this again and again, that before Trump makes an announcement, and he's all over the map, somebody invests a lot in the stock market and bets the right way. And of course, we saw the same thing in the crypto markets in in the stock market, and then also in crypto investments since Trump got involved in them. So this has been going all along, but with the tying of it to Iran and to this war in Iran, where American money is at stake, but also American lives have already been lost, people are starting to pay a lot more attention to what's going on here with the United States and national security. So this brought up something else that happened this week. You may or may not remember that the Republicans in the House of Representatives have been trying desperately to smear Jack Smith, who was a special counsel who was investigating both Donald Trump's participation in the attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election, the results of the presidential election, but also his retention of classified documents. Now, if you recall, when he left office, Trump kept a lot of documents with him, and the Department of Justice investigated. But then when Trump announced for the presidency really, really early, probably to stop that investigation, then Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed Jack Smith as special counsel to make sure it didn't look like the Department of Justice was going after a political opponent of the president. Go figure, right? So that's why Jack Smith came on. And Smith came on and put together two reports on Trump's behavior, both in the attempt to overturn the presidential election, but also in the classified documents case. And that Trump appointed judge in Florida named Eileen Cannon, who managed to delay and delay and delay so that most of this material never went forward, has put a lid on Jack Smith's report so that nobody really knows what he found. And that's highly unusual. A special counsel almost always reports, even if the stuff gets dismissed or whatever. That's kind of part of the job. But she has said, no, we're not going to do that. Anyway, the House of Representatives, the Oversight Committee, overseen by, not the Oversight Committee. So I almost made a big mistake there. The Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, actually, technically the House Committee on the Judiciary, that's its official name. Long history behind that I won't go into, but they have been trying to discredit Smith. And so they asked the Department of Justice for a number of documents related to his investigation. Now, it turns out that in the process of trying to get material to the Republicans to smear Smith, or apparently to smear Smith, the Department of Justice also sent over some documents that revealed a lot about what Trump had actually done with some of those documents. And among those things was a prosecutor's memo. And what the prosecutor's memo said, and this is all because the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee is named Jamie Raskin. He is a Democrat from Maryland. He wrote to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to say, hey, wait a minute here. We got a big issue here. And what he said was that, first of all, you let go a lot of material that Eileen Cannon, the judge who tried to put a lid on all this stuff, said you weren't allowed to. So first of all, you're basically throwing out the judge's orders, which is, illegal. But second of all, this prosecutor's memo says not only that Trump retained classified documents, but that one of those documents, at least one of those documents, was so secret that only 6 people, including the president, had access to it. So that's really secret. Also, that something was, one of the documents was a classified map, and that Trump allegedly showed that map to people, including now White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, on his private plane. And Raskin also recalled that a ghostwriter for Trump's for a Trump biography testified that Trump had said that he had kept plans, classified plans, for a U.S. strike on Iran. So Raskin looked at this and said, let's take a look at what Trump was doing when all these things took place. He was working with Saudi-backed real estate company, and by Saudi-backed in this case I mean the sovereign wealth fund, one of the sovereign wealth funds, and he was working with the Saudi-backed Live Golf tournament to make that come around. And this was also when people were investing from that part of the world were investing in Trump's businesses. So Raskin said, what's going on here, folks? We want to know if our national secrets are being compromised for Trump's businesses. Because, of course, we now know that one of the big people pushing for Trump to go into Iran was MBS, the Saudi crown prince, and that he is now, according to Raskin didn't say this, I'm saying this, according to the New York Times, MBS is now really pushing for Trump to put troops in, because he says, you can't leave Iran with the regime in place because it's going to be more dangerous than ever. And he is apparently reassuring Trump that a spike in gas prices won't last very long, which is not actually what most of the people who observe world trade say. They think that, in fact, the oil prices are going to be high for a long time, even if everything stopped tomorrow, which obviously it's not going to do. So we have here, in addition to the breakdown of the national of the free trade and freedom of the seas, you're seeing a real visceral example of what it means when the United States abandons those security agreements that we've had since World War II. You have the potential for people from other countries to compromise our national safety with the collusion of the leadership in the United States. Like all of a sudden, in the world that we lived in which we could trust that the president from whichever party cared deeply about keeping Americans safe, that's gone. We can't trust that. And you think about that, if you remember, like a year ago when I was talking about stuff like this, I would say, do you want to be like Russia, where the president can just throw troops into an unpopular war and you have no say in it? That's really kind of where we are, because the administration is not consulting Congress about this war, and it appears that he is talking to other countries and consulting his own wishes about whether or not we're going to continue to engage in this war against Iran that none of us had any say in, including our representatives in Congress, and that are coming back to haunt us both through higher prices, but also through the loss of lives, which of course gets under my skin because that was like top of the list for the framers of the Constitution. This is why the Congress is the body that declares war, because we don't want the situation that we're in actually to exist. So we have those things going on, but then there is that third pillar, representative democracy. And the reason that you have that as part of the pillar is not just because that's what the United States of America has stood for, but also because you need to have that in order to have the other two things. And this is the other place that you see Trump really now trying to exert his authority to take control even over our democracy, not only over things like over the war in Iran, but also over the SAVE Act. And you all keep asking me about the SAVE Act. And I just a few minutes ago got off an interview with Senator Alex Padilla of California, who is the ranking member of the Senate Rules Committee. So they're the ones who handle the degree to which the federal government oversees elections. So there's a lot in that if you want to listen to that as well. It's all the usual places. My YouTube page, Facebook, and probably Substack. I didn't check to see if it went there, but and by the way, again, you do not have to pay for any of these things, and certainly not my Substack. So the SAVE Act is really deliberately an attempt to get rid of Democrats voting. And they're saying this. They're saying, if we pass the SAVE Act, the Republicans will win for the foreseeable future. And if we don't, we're going to lose, because they know how crazy unpopular Trump is right now. And just as an aside on that, I pulled the numbers. No, I'll do those numbers in a second. So what is the SAVE Act? It's actually now the version that's in front of the Senate is called the Save America Act. And it has a number of components in it. And the Republicans are all over social media saying, why don't Democrats want you to have an ID? Most states already have IDs. That's not the issue at all. You can use things like your driver's license. And in some states, you can use, your hunting license. Those are forms of ID. And you probably, if you think about it, carry many forms of ID. I have a Library of Congress library card. I have my local library card, both of which have pictures. I have my work ID. I have my license. I'm trying to think of everything I have that has a picture on it. I mean, I've got a passport as well that I carry. But the point is, you have a lot of IDs, but most people are not like me, and they don't carry a passport. The truth is, the reason I carry my passport is because it's a different size than everything else, and I don't see very well. So I can feel that it's bigger when I'm in a situation where I need an ID. So I can just I don't have to look through a wallet or something. I can just feel that it's bigger. Um, but the SAVE Act doesn't say you need ID. It says you need proof of citizenship. Really big difference. Because for proof of citizenship, there are a few real IDs that do that. I think it's from 5 states. Don't quote me on that. But you need to have a birth certificate with your name on it as you are known today, with your real name on it, or you need a passport. And lots of people don't have those 2 documents, and they're expensive and they're hard to get. Now, the other things that are in the SAVE Act are a real restriction of voting by mail, although Trump, as you know, votes by mail himself. But the other piece of it that we do tend to forget to talk about is that it requires state governments to turn over their voting rolls and the information about voters to the federal government. Now, why do they want it? They want to take, when we know the answer to that, because a number of states have done that. They want to take those voter rolls and put them through, and this is so typical of American history and the confusion of it. They want to put it through a program. And when I talk about confusion, the program, which has nothing to do with the SAVE Act, is actually called SAVE. It's an old acronym from something else. They have nothing to do with each other, except they're the exact same word and they do different things. The SAVE program is one used by the federal government to examine the roles of benefits, for example, to make sure that the people applying for benefits are citizens. So, there are certain programs that you can't be part of unless you're a citizen. So you go, they put these things in, they put the list of names in this program, and it runs through and says, oh yeah, Richardson's a citizen, Smith's a citizen, but, Jones isn't, whatever. But so by putting those voter rolls through this system, what they're saying is they're going to flag undocumented immigrants who are voting. But the trick to this is that undocumented immigrants are not voting. It's already illegal to do. So the number of people who do it is like 4 people out of, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions. Like I read the number the other day, it's like 0.0000 something. It's just not a thing. But what we have found is when they use this system in the states that turned over their voter rolls, is they kicked a whole lot of people off the voter rolls by misidentifying names or by flagging people who are naturalized citizens. So they might have shown up in systems years ago as being an immigrant who was not a citizen. Now they have been naturalized, they get kicked off, and now they've got to go back and prove their citizenship, as well as anybody else who got kicked off, who might have had the same name as someone else or whatever. And what that will do is will purge a whole lot of people off the voter rolls. So between the 21 million people that the Brennan Center estimates would be kicked off the rolls because they don't have proper citizenship identification, and the number of people who would be tossed off under the system of handing over the voter rolls, they're basically dramatically saying, we basically don't want Americans to vote. We're trying to get rid of the idea of that you have a right to have a say in your government, which, by the way, is established in the freaking Declaration of Independence, that in order for a government to be legitimate, it must have the support of the people in it. So you're seeing them attack this third pillar, the idea of representative democracy as well. So a couple other questions that you asked about, you can see this lack of support for American democracy in this fight over the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA. The fact that TSA agents are not getting paid when ICE agents are getting paid. Even I learned some of the Coasties are getting paid. Some of the Coast Guard people are getting paid, but the TSA agents are not. And Trump desperately wants to keep them from being paid. And what's interesting about this is that even I, who am following this really closely, have lost track of what he wants in exchange for, before they get paid. And what's happened is that, as you remember, there were 12 appropriations bills to appropriate the money to fund the government for 2026, and the Democrats in the Senate refused to fund the appropriation bill that funds the Department of Homeland Security. And the reason for that was because they refused to put more money into immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border customs and border no customs and Border Protection. Customs and Border Protection is the parent agency for Border Patrol, which is the one that it does a lot of things. That's one of its agencies, and that's the one that has been so extraordinarily violent in the cities, especially in Minneapolis. And it was Border Patrol agents, I believe, who were responsible for both the shootings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. So the Democrats have said, we're not going to fund this until you promise to do some major reforms. And one of the reforms that they're insisting on is simply that you have to have a judicial warrant before you kick open someone's door and go in, which is what the courts have always said is the case under the Fourth Amendment. So they are literally asking for the Department of Homeland Security agents to follow the Constitution. And this is one of the sticking points, that the Republicans don't want them to have that. And so what's happened is now it's at least 8 times and maybe 9 times the Democrats have said, listen, we'll fund everything else. We'll fund TSA, we'll fund the Coast Guard, we'll fund everything else, but we're not going to fund ICE and Border Patrol until you agree to some reforms. And the Republicans keep saying, we're not going to do that. We want to go ahead and fund it as is. And Trump got involved on Sunday and said, well, I want the SAVE Act as well. And I also want legislation that reduces the rights of transgender Americans. I think sort of going back to his trying to get his base whipped up there. But what you're seeing is the real deliberate infliction of pain on TSA agents, but also on the American people. Right. This is, people are waiting in some of the lines in 14 cities around the country. You're seeing lines of 4 hours long, 5 hours long. And Trump is saying, I don't care until I get my way. You people have to act, you have to put up with this, which is really different than previous presidents who were at the negotiating table trying to say, let's find a way to make this go forward. And as Patty Murray, who is a senator from Washington, who is the ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, said, we're having a really hard time negotiating because Trump keeps changing what he wants. And when he does that, by the way, he's not supposed to have a say in this. When he does that, the Republicans sort of tear up whatever we were talking about and change things again. So you're seeing the pressure against all 3 of these pillars in this moment. Now that's the bad news. I want to reiterate something that Tim Snyder said yesterday when we talked. Again, it was a fabulous interview, probably worth your time to look at. And that as well is on my YouTube page. And probably his, and it's also in all the other usual places. Trump is wildly unpopular. So the new numbers are out. One of the reasons that the Democrats feel comfortable saying they don't want to fund ICE and Border Patrol the way they are is because only 35% of Americans agree with the way Trump has handled immigration. 35%. That was one of his strongest suits, right? 35%. 61% of Americans oppose the way he has handled immigration, and nearly half of them, 48%, have very strong, unfavorable views of his handling of immigration. And that's a category that pollsters pay attention to. Very strong feelings means you're going to turn out to vote. That is, of course, a dramatic drop, but there is also a real drop in his popularity, in his job approval rating, which has fallen to the point now that, um, let me just look at the numbers to make sure I get them right. What is this? All of a sudden, I'm just blanking on this number. Oh, here we go. Um, that 36% of Americans approve of Trump's the way Trump is handling his office. That is historically low. We're down into the historic level, and only 25% approve of how he is handling the cost of living. At the same time that you're seeing, as I say, rising prices everywhere and disapproval of the way he's handling immigration and every other policy as well. So he is unusually unpopular and very brittle. And that means that there is real potential to push back and to further weaken this president. Now, there is also the fact that he's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I mean, the man, I mean, he says one thing one minute, something else the next minute. Sometimes he's won a victory in Iran. Sometimes he's begging them to change their approach. Sometimes he's going to bomb them. He's all over the map. By the way, you keep asking about him saying that they asked him to be the supreme leader. To me, that's a misreading of what he said. I read what he said as he was imitating the people that they were asking to be supreme leader, and saying they were saying, "Oh, I don't want the job," implying that they would get killed if they took that job. That's how I read it. I mean, I think he's out to lunch, but I don't think in that case he actually thinks they want to make him supreme leader. I do think that his behavior is off the charts erratic, and the Republicans, many of them, are playing into it, like the fact that the House Republicans last night gave him an award. This idea of simply throwing awards at him like he's, a disappointed fourth grader is bizarre, among other things. But so that's going on. I would also say to you, let me find my notes here, that there's a lot of stuff going on. And now I'm back to that idea of there's all this stuff going on, but rather than reacting to it piecemeal, it's time to do what the guy on the floor told me to do: step back, take a breath, and take control of the situation. So we need to think about what we want the world to look like. And many parts of the world that we have lost under Trump are going to be rebuildable. Not all of them. That world is gone. We're never going back to January 19th, 2025. But we could, in fact, reinforce the idea of allying with democratic nations, our old allies, rather than um, the autocrats and the oligarchs that Trump is trying to line us up with. It is still our country. And making your voices heard on matters like that will certainly matter. But there is also a couple of other things as well. We talk about the SAVE Act and pushing back against the SAVE Act, and people asked me if I think that the SAVE Act is going to pass. And I maintain that the chances are very good that it won't. It'll take a real toll on the Republicans to pass that act. And I talked the other day about how they would have to do it. But it is still possible for states to get into an awful lot of mischief on their own. And one of the places where you can put your oar in and really make a difference is at the state level, at the local level, and at the state level, making sure to push back against the idea of the different measures that states might be trying to put in place to stop people from voting. Look for your states. And a lot of people have said, what are the different ways to do that? There are all kinds of organizations, both at the state level and at the national level, that are protecting the right to vote and making sure other people can vote. So Google it, talk to people, find out what is useful in your state to protect the right to vote. But then there's also a couple of other things. Somebody asked me if it was worthwhile to turn out to the No Kings rally this Saturday. That some people say turning out to rallies doesn't matter. That's absolutely wrong. Turning out to rallies to show your physical support for something is huge. Not only does it make other people recognize that they're part of something bigger, and give them courage to do more, but also it demonstrates not only to the people in power, but also to people who want to be in power. Remember, we have an election coming up, that if they want your support, they need to support the measures that you care about. So, one of the measures that people use is that if 3.5% of a population turns out at rallies, you're looking at regime change. And there's I mean, it's just kind of a rule that people use. That's a good idea. It's a good way to think about it. But it also, instead of aiming for that perfect number, it's worth pointing out that these demonstrations that show that the administration does not have the support of the American people challenge its very legitimacy, because, as you remember, our Constitution begins "We the people," and goes on to say that we the people loan to our elected officials our power. But if they are acting in ways that we don't approve of, that we cease to support, we can take that power back. And that's really, really important to demonstrate. And if you don't think it's important, think about what happened after the last No Kings rally, which happened on a Saturday. The next Monday, Trump began knocking down the East Wing of the White House. He was that upset about the No Kings rally. And you've asked me, do I think he's going to do something like that again now? I'm afraid the answer to that is yes. I think if we demonstrate our disapproval, he's going to lash out in some way. But that does not mean we shouldn't do it. It still is our country, and we have the right and perhaps the duty to make it clear that this is not the government, or the government is not behaving in ways that we think are acceptable. So you can absolutely turn out for rallies. You can support people at the local level, as I say, at the state level, and by making your wishes known at the national level by calling both your the Congress people that are doing things you like, but also the ones who are doing things you don't like, and saying good things to the one, and telling the others who are not doing what you want that you're not happy with the way they're behaving. But here's something else that Tim Snyder pointed out. I talk a lot about how important it is to talk to people about things that matter to you, at the local level, but also at the state and national level. Just saying, you're not okay with the insider trading that seems to be happening on the stock market. Somebody walked away with 600 million bucks, based on what Trump decided to do or decided to say, and what signals that gave to our allies and partners and to Iran. I mean, I'm not okay with that. I would not be okay with any president doing it. It's maybe why we've not had presidents do it in the past, because they thought it was so beyond anything that was acceptable. So talk to people about that, things you care about. Education's a big thing for me, but also Tim said something really interesting, and that was, one of the things that he is famous for is a piece he wrote year or more ago about what life looks like under an authoritarian leader. And it's really horrific, because, to me anyway, because while you tend to think about the really dramatic stuff, having people haul you off in the middle of the night or whatever, what he talks about is far more insidious. The idea that, you can't get your kid can't go to a decent school if you speak out against the regime, so you don't speak out against the regime. And, you if you don't do what they want you to do, somebody else will, so you might as well. And what you see is an erosion of community and family. Like, you can't speak out because you're going to hurt your kids, or your kids are estranged from you because you never quite know if they're spying on you. And one of the things that he suggested for people to feel as if they are fighting back against the world that is growing around us is to be nice to each other. To speak to people at the grocery store, to do things that you care about, and to, do your art, and to walk, and to be part of a community, and to fight back at a very personal level with the idea that we're a community and we take care of each other. And that's something that we can all do regardless of where we are in our lives and in the things that we have to accomplish. So that's another thing to think about today. And on that note, I meant to call attention to the fact that for people who are not able to get access easily to a No Kings rally on Saturday, there is organized by the Stand Up for Science people an accessible rally online. And you can, again, Google that and you can find that. So, we are watching the destruction of a world that brought us extraordinary wealth and society in the United States and around the world. I'm sorry, wealth and safety in the United States and around the world for 80 years. And we're watching it torn apart by such a small man. And the people around him, who, as Snyder pointed out, have been selected by him and his people to be yes men and yes women. But that doesn't mean we have to accept the world that they are trying to hand to us. That what we really need to do is envision a world on the other side of this and to remember that it's our government and that in the past we have used that government to enable more of us to have access to equality before the law, to resources, and to the American dream, the idea that you can be who you want to be. And we've used the government to do that in the past. And when we have done that in the progressive era, for example, or in the 1930s and on through the 1970s, what we got was a much fairer, much more just society. So, keeping that in mind and working toward that, not simply working against the destruction that we see against us, but remembering that there is something better on the other side of that is going to be really important when we think about what kind of a world we want to build on the other side of this. And it will give us courage to build that world. So, as my friend Joanne says, be of good cheer, right, and be of good courage to make that happen going forward. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you again soon. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.